In the late 1960s, a down-on-his-luck cab driver in Las Vegas decided he would get rich quick by kidnapping the son of casino owner Benny Binion. This would prove to be a poor choice. Before establishing the Horseshoe Casino in downtown Vegas, Benny Binion had been one of the most feared gangsters in Dallas, and openly admitted to having killed at least 2 men. Today on Mayhem in the Desert, we take a look at how a Vegas cab driver learned the timeless lesson that you should never try to kidnap a gangster's son. The trial surrounding the 1998 murder of casino heir Ted Binion was one of the most sensational cases in Las Vegas history. But decades before tales of jilted lovers, underground vaults in the desert brimming with silver bullion, and of a man rapidly squandering his wealth on a wild lifestyle, Ted Binion was at the center of another Vegas murder tale. Benny Binion, the founder and de facto owner of Binion's Horseshoe Casino in downtown Las Vegas from 1946 until his death in 1989, was known for being an affable Texan with a reputation for taking care of his family as well as his employees. But despite his friendly demeanor, Old Man Binion never shed his roots as a notorious Dallas organized crime figure of the 1930s and 40s that oversaw a sprawling network of illegal gambling dens throughout that city. During his days in Dallas, Binion maintained his extensive gambling network by faithfully following the rule, "Do your enemies before they can do you." That motto resulted in numerous deaths during Binion's time at the top of the Dallas organized crime heap. Benny Binion openly admitted to the killing of 2 men in Dallas. In 1931, Frank Bolding, a local rum runner, entered Binion's backyard where he encountered the gamblers sitting on a crate. Bolding charged Binion with a knife in hand. The quick-reacting Binion tipped his crate over and fell backwards, only to peer back over the crate with gun in hand, firing several shots to bring down his attacker. This deadly scuffle resulted in Benny Binion being given the nickname the Cowboy. Then, in 1936, Binion was facing encroachment on his territory by rival racketeer Ben Frieden. In response, one day in September of that year, Binion approached on foot as his competitor sat unaware in a parked car in a neighborhood under Binion's control. Binion produced a .45 and cut his rival down. Then he took out another firearm and gave himself a flesh wound before tossing the weapon in Ben Frieden's vehicle. A bought and paid for district attorney agreed with Binion's claims of self-defense. But then there were all of the other murders Binion never talked about. After all, discretion and the ability to keep a secret were essential to long-term success in his sort of enterprise. A chief enforcer for Binion in Dallas was Lois Green, a hitman whose signature was burying his victims alive, a practice that gave potential competitors to Binion pause before deciding to enter the gambling racket. But Binion ultimately had to fold up shop in 1946 when his chosen candidate for sheriff lost the local election. Benny Binion founded the Horseshoe Casino on Fremont Street in downtown Las Vegas the same year he left Dallas. The Horseshoe gained notoriety for its friendliness to gamblers. There were no limits on wagers, as well as its down-home atmosphere. Though Benny Binion was able to gain legitimacy in a place like Las Vegas, and while he preferred to resolve things above board if possible, old habits die hard. And if push came to shove, Benny never hesitated when he believed it necessary to return to the tools of the trade that served him so well back in Dallas. And a sure way to trigger the bad side of Benny Binion was to come after what he cherished most, his wife and 5 children, particularly his favorite son, Ted Binion. Like most residents of Las Vegas since its founding, Marvin Shumate was not a native of the city. After being born in a town a few miles north of Dallas, at about the same time that Benny Binion was consolidating control of that city's rackets, Shumate spent most of his life in Oklahoma. For over a decade, he ran a pool hall in Oklahoma City, facing by his own admission hundreds of arrests, though he claimed he had never served a day in jail for any of the charges brought against him, usually liquor and betting violations. But Marvin eventually left the heat in Oklahoma City and headed west to Las Vegas in 1965. And by 1967, the 43-year-old had settled down with his wife and 3 children in a working-class neighborhood, making a living as a cab driver with the Whittlesea Blue Cab Company. Marvin told those close to him that he planned to stay on the straight and narrow after leaving Oklahoma behind. But he also couldn't help naturally striking up friendships with other men carrying a criminal past, both at work and at Pappy's Bar, a watering hole for locals that Marvin frequented every day after work, located in a cramped shopping center at the intersection of Flamingo Road and Paradise Boulevard, less than a mile from the glow of the Strip. By 1967, Marvin Shumate had fallen into the orbit of Benny Binion, along with some of that gambler's toughest enforcers. This included Tom Hanley, head of a local gaming employee union and Binion's go-to hitman. Marvin, the former small-time gambler and crook, had gotten so deep that he was even present in late 1965 at the downtown Horseshoe Casino when Hanley and his cohorts were planning the assassination of the head of the local plumbers union. Things could have continued to go well for Marvin if he wanted. He could have kept his day job as a cabbie and brought in cash on the side by doing small jobs for Benny Binion and Tom Hanley. In fact, Marvin's time at the Horseshoe Casino led to his 22-year-old son Dennis striking up a friendship with 24-year-old Ted Binion. Marvin Shumate's young son and Ted Binion spent their time partying hard and fully embracing the vices offered by the growing city of Las Vegas. But Marvin overreached. Sometime in late 1967, an idea occurred to him, a scheme that would leave him a wealthy man. He would use information inadvertently provided by his son to learn Ted Binion's routines. Then, Marvin Shumate and some of his friends from the cab company and Pappy's Bar would kidnap the casino heir in order to collect a hefty ransom from Old Man Binion. One of the 4 men Marvin enlisted into the kidnapping plot was a friend at Pappy's Bar, a dealer at a local casino with an extensive criminal history by the name of Bill Wade. When Marvin told Wade the broad contours of the plan to kidnap the young Binion, the dealer was entranced by the prospect of earning a quick payday that would allow him to leave behind his day job. Marvin and his co-conspirators refined the details of the kidnapping plot over the course of a few weeks in late 1967. But as they worked out the details, Marvin Shumate came to a cold realization that a crucial change of plans was necessary. The only way to get away with the ransom money would be to kill Ted Binion after the ransom was received. Marvin explained in separate conversations to his co-conspirators that there was no other way. Marvin sensed some resistance to the thought of murder from Bill Wade. He explained to his friend that if they allowed Ted to live, the young Binion would in short order be able to provide the old man with enough information to link Marvin to the plot via his son's relationship with Ted. There was no record of violence in Marvin Shumate's past back in Oklahoma, but the former small-time gambling ring operator was now upping the ante to murder. Wade told his friend that he understood what had to be done. But while Bill Wade understood, he did not agree with this change in plans. He was no murderer. A thief and an extortionist, yes, but not a murderer. Wade fretted over what to do, and a chill would run through him when he finally came to the conclusion that the only course of action left to him was to let Old Man Binion know about the plot. Bill Wade reached out to a man he called the only honest cop in town, Detective Mike Whitney of the Las Vegas Police Department. He had information about a planned kidnapping, but Wade needed a promise from Detective Whitney. No one else at the police department would be involved in disrupting the plot. Wade told Detective Whitney to relay life-or-death information to one of the most powerful and ruthless casino owners in Las Vegas. The casino dealer needed Benny Binion to know he had become aware of chatter regarding a plot to kidnap his son Ted. And Wade also wanted Benny to know that he had the name of the man behind the plot, some cabbie named Marvin Shumate. After taking steps to notify Old Man Binion of the kidnapping-turned-murder plot, Wade cut off all contact with Marvin and tried to continue to lead a normal life. He attempted to reassure himself that Benny Binion would have no reason to suspect that he had any involvement in the plot. Bill Wade was relieved when a few days later Detective Whitney met him to let Wade know that Old Man Binion appreciated the tip and that action would soon be taken to stop the kidnapping plot before it could proceed any further. In fact, Binion was so grateful that he wanted the detective to deliver $500 to Wade for providing the information. Corruption was rampant among law enforcement officers in mob-controlled 1960s Las Vegas, with the rot stemming from the top on down. Sheriff Ralph Lamb would later face federal scrutiny for accepting large, quote, loans that were never expected to be repaid from Benny Binion. And Detective Whitney appears to have also been on Old Man Binion's payroll as well, since he failed to inform any of his superiors about the tip from Wade regarding the apparent kidnapping plot targeting Ted Binion. Marvin Shumate didn't see his old pal Bill Wade at their watering hole on Flamingo Road anymore. He was starting to have second thoughts himself about the whole scheme. The notion even crept into his head that Wade may have turned informant. The evening of December 2nd, 1967, was a Saturday, which meant that Marvin had a busy shift chauffeuring tourists. But he still managed to get off near his normal quitting time of 8 p.m. After Marvin dropped his taxi off at the depot, the creature of habit headed to the same spot he headed every night after work, Pappy's Bar. Marvin exited his vehicle, planning to contemplate his next moves over several rounds of drinks. But he never made it inside the establishment. A man exited a vehicle as Marvin headed toward the bar and intercepted the cab driver. It was a familiar face, Tom Hanley. Marvin smiled and greeted his acquaintance. Tom Hanley told Marvin that his assistance was needed on some business on behalf of Benny Binion. Hanley gestured toward his waiting car. What could Marvin do other than accept Hanley's offer? Marvin Shumate clung to a belief that it was merely coincidence. Wade had stopped going to the bar after the topic of murdering Ted Binion had been broached, and that now, a few days later, one of the old man's most ruthless triggermen was inviting him for a late-night ride. Marvin noted two other men in the back seat as he approached Tom Hanley's vehicle. One of Hanley's associates, longtime friend Alphonse Bass, stepped out of the rear of the car, allowing Marvin to take a seat in the middle. The vehicle then took off down Flamingo Road and headed toward the endless desert surrounding the city. At a certain point during the drive, Once the car made its way past the last houses lining Lake Mead Boulevard, past Nellis Road, and into the pitch black, Marvin could no longer deny what was about to happen. The four men continued the rest of the drive in silence until the vehicle pulled to a stop in the dirt along the side of the road. Hanley killed the engine. Then Tom Hanley and his associates exited the car along with Marvin Shumate and entered the frigid winter air. A few hundred yards in the distance stood Sunrise Mountain, a promontory guarding the east end of the Las Vegas Valley. The middle-aged former pool hall operator stood shivering, the silhouettes of Hanley and his triggermen standing against the luminescent glow of the city in the distance. Marvin could hear one of his captors open the trunk of the car to retrieve something. Hanley told Marvin they were going for a walk. Marvin complied. There was no way out, and he knew it. The hitmen followed Marvin for a bit toward one of the trails winding along Sunrise Mountain. About 30 feet off from the road, one of the trio told Marvin to turn around. Marvin Shumate turned and was confronted by Tom Hanley, wielding a shotgun. The cab driver raised a hand in defense. The thunderous boom rang throughout the empty desert as Hanley fired a single round into Marvin's chest from a distance of 3 feet, sending him crumpling to the freezing desert floor. Marvin lay motionless on the ground, the blast having destroyed his heart and lungs. But Old Man Binion's enforcers were out here on a mission that had to be completed, which is why one of them approached Marvin's motionless body. A single round from a .38 revolver was fired into his head just behind the ear. Then Tom Hanley and his crew got in their car and drove back to the city. Bill Wade was aware that his old drinking buddy had been executed on the orders of Old Man Binion because he was involved in the cover-up of the plot. After the slaying, Hanley contacted Wade and told him to bury one of the murder weapons in the desert. Wade met Hanley and complied with his request. Wade hoped that would be the end of the whole messy and ill-conceived kidnapping plot. But a few days after Marvin Shumate's brutal murder, Wade received an anonymous call while drinking at Pappy's bar. He picked up the receiver and was told by a voice he didn't recognize, "You've got 24 hours to get out of Vegas, or else." He promptly fled the heat in Las Vegas for less life-threatening environs. In fact, Wade went about as far as he possibly could, ultimately ending up on the East Coast. The Shumate murder would surface again later in 1968 and result in more deaths across the Las Vegas Valley. Tom Hanley was arrested that year for the 1966 murder of plumbing union boss Ralph Alsop, who had been cut down by a shotgun wielded by a hidden gunman lying in wait just after the union boss arrived at his Vegas home. A key witness for the state of Nevada was one of Hanley's most reliable henchmen, Alphonse Bass, who offered information about not only Hanley's role in Alsop's murder, but also in the murder of Marvin Shumate. After all, Alphonse Bass had been present on that fateful night at Sunrise Mountain. Hanley's attorneys put on a stellar defense that resulted in Tom Hanley's acquittal of the Alsop murder charge. But prosecutors had no time to gain more information from Alphonse Bass about the Shumate killing. On March 30th, 1969, Alphonse Bass arrived at the house of Tom Hanley's sister in central Las Vegas after she called to complain of a home emergency in need of a handyman. Bass prided himself in helping friends fix things around their homes, and he arrived as soon as he was able. Alphonse Bass took only a few steps into the house before he was grabbed by an assailant and injected with a powerful sleep agent. Once the attacker was certain Bass was unconscious, he acted quickly to douse Hanley's sister's home in accelerant. Then he set it alight, sealing Bass's fate. Though Tom Hanley was incarcerated at the time of the Bass murder, he faced charges for ordering the hit. But like in the Alsop case, Hanley was acquitted of murdering his former flunky. The murder of Marvin Shumate officially remains unsolved. It helped that outside of the Shumate family, there was no public outcry demanding justice for the slaying of an unreformed small-time crook. And even if there had been, there was no way to make a case against Shumate's killers. One of the key witnesses to the events leading up to the murder, Detective Whitney, was on Benny Binion's payroll and maintained the line that Shumate's name never came up during his discussions with Old Man Binion about the kidnapping plot. And Sheriff Ralph Lamb, the chief law enforcement officer in Las Vegas, could not have gone after Binion even if he had been so inclined. Just like back in Dallas, the old-time gangster had co-opted the top cop in town by providing him tens of thousands of dollars in, quote, loans that were never repaid. Any investigation of Binion by Sheriff Lamb would end up being an investigation into the sheriff's own wrongdoing. In addition to abiding by the rule that he needed to do his enemies before they did him, Benny Binion also knew that when everyone is dirty, no one is guilty. Ted Binion survived the attempt on his life hatched by Marvin Shumate, but he never outgrew his taste for partying. By the late 1990s, Ted had fallen into a serious heroin addiction and playboy lifestyle that ended in him becoming the victim of an apparent murder plot, possibly in an effort to steal millions of dollars in silver bullion the casino heir kept buried on his property in the desert 50 miles north of Las Vegas. One final interesting note about this Las Vegas true crime tale is that after we wrote about the Marvin Shumate killing, one of his relatives reached out to us and relayed an interesting piece of family lore. Apparently, the shotgun used by Tom Hanley to murder Marvin Shumate in the desert on a cold night in 1967 hung on a wall in the basement of the Horseshoe Casino in downtown Las Vegas as a trophy and as a warning. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Mayhem in the Desert. If you want to find out more about the true crime history of Las Vegas, be sure to subscribe to our channel or visit our website at mayheminthedesert.com to read in-depth true crime stories about Sin City. And remember to be careful. It's a big desert out there.